I didn't flinch when he offered to drive me to the appointment, or when he waited outside the exam room like a loyal son. But when Dr. Grant slipped the envelope into my hand and whispered, "Don't let your son see the results," my breath caught. He knew. And when I opened it, alone, shaking, heart thudding, I saw the truth laid out in black and white. I wasn't declining, but someone was counting on me too. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The fluorescent lights in the exam room hummed low, barely audible beneath the hush of antiseptic air. Helen Carter sat stiff-backed on the edge of the padded table, the disposable paper crinkling beneath her as she adjusted her cardigan. The room smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and lemon disinfectant. Her pulse still thudded from the memory test, reciting sequences backward, identifying presidents, drawing that silly clock face. Across from her, Dr. Michael Grant typed something into his tablet with deliberate care. His face was as composed as always, gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, sleeves rolled just above the wrists, his wedding ring glinting in the overhead light. But there was something extra in the way he paused before speaking. Finally, he looked up. "Helen," he said softly, "your results are excellent. No signs of cognitive decline. You're sharp as ever." She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Relief flooded her chest, warm and instant. But then his eyes flicked to the closed door behind her. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plain, sealed envelope. "Take this," he said, voice barely above a whisper as he handed it to her. "But don't let your son see it." Helen blinked. "Daniel?" Dr. Grant didn't answer directly, just gave a small shake of his head and pressed the envelope gently into her palm. His fingers lingered for a beat too long, enough to tell her this wasn't a precaution, it was a warning. The bus stop outside the clinic was quiet, except for a few falling leaves brushing along the sidewalk. Helen stood under the shelter, envelope tucked tightly under her gloved hand, her coat buttoned all the way up. The autumn wind cut through the seams anyway. Inside her purse, the envelope felt heavier than it should, like it carried not paper, but some unknown consequence. Her mind kept circling back to the doctor's face, the soft caution in his voice. She knew Michael Grant. He didn't overreact. If he was concerned enough to whisper. She boarded the bus and sat in the rear corner, away from the chatter of college kids and grocery bags and tired commuters. Every bump in the road jostled the envelope inside her purse, like it was alive, waiting to be opened, demanding attention. Helen's house greeted her with its familiar silence, the ticking wall clock, and the faint creak of old wooden floors. She hung her coat by the door, purse still on her arm, boots clicking gently against the tile. "Hey, Mom." Daniel's voice cut through the hallway like a scalpel. "You were gone a while." She turned. He was leaning on the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, a half-drunk mug of coffee in his hand. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Long wait at the lab," she replied, voice even. He stepped closer. "What did the doctor say?" There it was. Helen forced a small shrug. "Follow up in 6 months. Nothing urgent." His gaze lingered too long on her purse. She shifted it behind her. "You know how they are." Always hedging, Daniel gave a small laugh. "Yeah, guess so." As he walked past her toward the living room, she took 2 quick steps to her coat, slipped the envelope into the inner pocket, and smoothed the fabric down. That night, long after the dishwasher had hummed to a stop and Daniel had gone to bed, Helen sat in the armchair by the bay window. The house was dark except for the soft halo of the table lamp. Her fingers, careful and deliberate, pulled the envelope from her coat. The seal tore with a quiet shk. She unfolded the paper. Test results. Battery complete. Memory, language, reasoning, normal across the board. And handwritten below the printout, in Dr. Grant's clean cursive, "No cognitive decline. Sound mind? Be careful. He asked if we could adjust your file." Helen stared at the note, the words like ice down her spine. Her throat tightened. She read it again. "Adjust your file?" She didn't hear Daniel come halfway down the stairs, but she felt something shift. An instinct honed over 7 decades. He was watching. She tucked the paper behind the cushion just as he spoke. "Everything okay down here?" Helen looked up slowly. His silhouette loomed at the bottom of the stairs. "Just couldn't sleep," she said, her voice calm. "Old bones." He nodded once. "Try to get some rest, okay?" "Of course, dear." She waited until his footsteps retreated upstairs. Then, with a shaking hand, she pulled the note back out. Her fingers traced the ink like it might disappear. He asked if we could adjust your file. She folded the paper again, once, twice, and slipped it inside her Bible on the end table. It nestled quietly between Psalms and Proverbs. Outside, wind scraped against the windows. Inside, Helen Carter stared into the dark. She was perfectly fit, clear-minded, and now she knew something her son had hoped she never would. The morning sun filtered in through the thin lace curtains, laying a soft patchwork of light across Helen's kitchen table. The envelope sat in front of her, reopened, edges slightly frayed from the night before. She hadn't slept, just moved from room to room like a ghost, the paper always clutched somewhere close. Now, in the calm of daylight, she read it again. No cognitive decline. Sound mind. Be careful. He asked if we could adjust your file. She studied every loop in Dr. Grant's handwriting, looking for something. An explanation, a mistake, a misreading. But there was none. Just the weight of truth pressing down on her shoulders like a winter coat. Adjust your file. Helen's fingers curled into the tablecloth. Why would her own son want her declared unfit? What could he possibly gain? And then, with terrible clarity, it clicked into place. 3 weeks ago, Daniel showing up with that manila folder. Some forms to keep things simple just in case something ever happened, he'd said casually, like he was talking about organizing the junk drawer. He had called them precautionary, power of attorney papers. She hadn't signed them. She'd smiled, asked for time to read them over, then tucked them away under a stack of cookbooks. But now, the timing. It wasn't precaution, it was strategy. The phone rang, slicing through the silence like a blade. Helen flinched. She reached for it with trembling fingers, unsure whether she wanted it to be Daniel or not Daniel. "Grandma?" Emily's voice. Helen's heartbeat slowed. "Yes, sweetheart. You okay? You sound off." Helen glanced at the note on the table. Her lips parted. She almost said it. Almost spilled the entire truth into her granddaughter's waiting silence, but something stopped her. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was that tiny voice whispering, "Not yet." "Just tired," she said. "Doctor appointment wore me out." Emily hesitated. "Okay, well, call if you need anything. I mean it. I will. I love you." Helen closed her eyes. "I love you too." She hung up slowly, phone still in hand when the doorbell rang. Nancy Blake didn't wait for an invite. She never had. "I brought blueberry muffins," she announced, bustling into the kitchen like wind with gray curls. "And don't start." "Yes, they're store-bought. I'm 73. Not dead." Helen gave a weak smile as Nancy plopped into the chair across from her, coat still on, purse still dangling from one shoulder. Nancy's eyes went straight to the envelope. "That it?" Helen nodded. Nancy leaned in. "And?" Helen handed it over without a word. Nancy scanned it in silence, eyes narrowing. "Well, damn," she muttered finally. Michael wasn't kidding. Helen stared at the wood grain of the table. "Why would Daniel?" "Because he thinks you're too old to fight back," Nancy said flatly. "Because he smells money or control or both. Doesn't matter why. What matters is, he started playing chess, and you're still deciding whether or not to pick up the board." "I'm not ready for a fight," Helen whispered. Nancy reached across the table, rested her hand over Helen's. "Then get ready." They sat like that for a long moment, the envelope between them like a silent referee. Finally, Helen pulled her hand back, stood, and walked to the living room. She lifted the worn leather Bible off the end table, the one that had followed her through every move, every season of life. She slid the note inside. Psalm 71, verse 9. "Do not cast me away when I am old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone." As she closed the cover, the door upstairs creaked open. "Daniel." Helen pressed the Bible tight to her chest and turned toward the sound, her face unreadable. Helen stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing her teacup under a weak stream of water, when Daniel appeared behind her. She didn't hear him come in, just felt it, the way the air seemed to thicken with his presence. "Got a minute?" he asked casually. Though his tone had an edge that suggested it wasn't really a question, she turned off the faucet and dried her hands on a towel, bracing herself. Daniel already had the folder in his hands. He placed it on the kitchen table like it was something benign. Taxes, maybe, or vacation paperwork. I went ahead and filled out most of it for you, he said, flipping it open. Just a few signatures. Helen took a seat slowly, every joint moving like stone. What is it this time? He gave a small chuckle as if amused by her caution. Same as before. Power of attorney. It's smart, Mom. Practical. You've always been practical. Helen kept her gaze soft, lips parted in an almost fragile smile. And if I don't feel ready? Daniel shrugged, too quickly. Then you take your time. Of course, I'm not pushing you. But she noticed the way his jaw clenched when he said it, the impatience hiding behind the smile. Then Paula stepped into the doorway, holding a laundry basket. Her eyes flicked from the form to Helen, then back to Daniel. She didn't say anything, just gave a small nod. A silent vote. A quiet allegiance. Helen turned back to the paperwork, letting her shoulders slump just slightly. I'll think about it, she said, voice thin. Daniel smiled. That's all I ask. An hour later, Helen stood alone in her bedroom, the door locked. The form sat on the bedspread like a snake. She pulled open the top drawer of her nightstand and retrieved the yellow post-it she'd kept there for months, its corners curling. Rachel Kim, Elder Law, 608-5551-479. She dialed with fingers that barely felt like hers. The phone rang once, twice. A woman's voice, sharp but calm. Rachel Kim's office? Helen cleared her throat. Yes, I was given your number. I'm Helen Carter. I need help. There was a pause, then a shift in tone. Go ahead, Mrs. Carter. My doctor, Michael Grant, told me to call. It's about a power of attorney. And my son. I think something's wrong. Rachel's voice was quick, efficient, unwavering. Do not sign anything, she said. Do you still have the documents? Yes. And anything else? Medical records? Notes? Bring those too. You need to. Come in. Helen looked toward the hallway, listening for footsteps. When? As soon as you can? I'll block time. Helen felt the tension in her spine begin to loosen. She thanked her and hung up, the silence in the room suddenly loud. She moved quickly. The envelope from Dr. Grant, the printed test results, the POA form Daniel had left behind, all tucked into her black leather purse. She double-checked the Bible. Still there. Still safe between the pages of Psalm 71. Then a knock on her bedroom door startled her. Grandma. Emily. Helen opened it slowly. Yes, sweetheart. Emily stepped inside, her brows pulled together in concern. You okay? I heard you on the phone. Helen hesitated, then gave a soft smile. I need to go downtown for a bit. Emily looked skeptical. With that storm coming in? I'll be quick. I'll drive you, Emily said immediately. No way I'm letting you stand around waiting for the bus. Helen opened her mouth to argue, but Emily had already turned to grab her keys. Let me at least do one thing for you, she added more gently. Helen nodded. All right. They pulled out of the driveway 10 minutes later. Rain was starting, light but persistent, speckling the windshield. Emily reached over and turned up the wipers. From the passenger seat, Helen stared straight ahead, purse gripped tightly in her lap. Inside it was everything. Truth, proof, and a line she couldn't uncross. The law office smelled like leather and printer toner. Clean, organized, no nonsense. Framed degrees lined the walls in a precise row, and the blinds were half drawn against the rain outside. Helen sat stiffly in a high-backed chair across from Rachel Kim, who was already halfway through reading the medical report from Dr. Grant. Her expression was unreadable, focused, jaw slightly clenched, one red pen tapping quietly on the desk. Emily sat beside her grandmother, arms crossed, chin lifted in quiet defense. Finally, Rachel looked up. Your doctor did the right thing. She tapped the top of the paper. These results make one thing absolutely clear. You are of sound mind, fully capable of making your own legal and financial decisions. Helen didn't reply at first. She just exhaled slowly, like some small, invisible weight had shifted off her chest. But, Rachel continued, her voice sharper now, if your son is already trying to use legal forms against you, the risks don't stop at POA. If he were to petition for guardianship, or try to claim you're mentally unfit, that opens up a much more dangerous door. The court could strip you of decision-making entirely. Emily's hands balled into fists. He doesn't get to do that. She's not. I know, Rachel said, turning toward her gently, which is why we have to get ahead of it. And fast. She pulled a blank form from the drawer and slid it across the desk. You mentioned your home, your savings, retirement accounts? Helen nodded. Modest, but yes. It's enough. Rachel drew a thin circle around the top of the paper. We establish a trust. You keep full control while you're alive, and name someone you trust to succeed you. That way, if anything happens, God forbid, there's a clear chain of control. But no one can touch your assets or move to take over without a legal battle. And we'll have a rock-solid record that you were fully competent when it was created. Helen glanced at Emily. She's who I trust, she said softly. If anything happens to me, I want her to carry the torch. Emily's jaw trembled slightly, but she stayed composed. Rachel offered a small nod. Then we'll name her as successor trustee. I'll begin drafting immediately. You'll review everything before signing. She stood and moved to a locked cabinet in the corner, pulling out a thin folder and setting it beside her laptop. I'll also file a protective statement with the court, just in case your son tries to initiate anything shady, any guardianship filings or POA enforcement. Once these documents are registered, he won't be able to act without the court flagging it. A quiet knock interrupted them. The receptionist poked her head in. Your next appointment is running late. You've got a few more minutes if you need them. Rachel nodded, then turned back to Helen. Is there anyone who can serve as a witness? Someone who's seen what's happening? Helen didn't hesitate. Nancy Blake, my oldest friend. She's already seen the note. Perfect, Rachel said, scribbling her name down. For the first time since she walked in, Helen leaned back slightly in her chair. Her body relaxed just enough to notice. Rachel studied her for a moment. This is going to be a process, she said carefully. You need to brace for pushback. People like your son, when they lose control, they don't always go quietly. Helen met her eyes, voice low and steady. He thinks I'm weak. Rachel blinked. And are you? Helen smiled. Small, almost imperceptible. Let him keep thinking it. Helen was folding laundry in the den when Daniel burst in, the door slamming against the wall with a thud that made her flinch. He didn't even try to disguise the fury. You're plotting against me. The words were a growl, low, venom-laced, and they hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Helen didn't look up right away. She calmly folded a towel, placed it on the stack, and reached for another. Daniel stepped closer. You think I wouldn't find out? Now she looked at him. Find out what, dear? He sneered. The lawyer, the trust, the damn filings. You really thought I wouldn't catch wind of it? I'm not stupid, Mother. She tilted her head slightly, face unreadable. Then act like you're not. That hit like a slap. His nostrils flared. You think you can cut me out of everything? After all I've done for this family? Helen said nothing. She simply reached for the next piece of laundry. He slammed his hand down on the folding table, rattling the ceramic bowl beside her. I need access to your accounts. Today. I can't keep floating the damn house bills while you play games. I never asked you to. Daniel laughed bitterly, then leaned in closer. Is this Emily's idea? That lawyer? You think I don't see what's happening here? You're being manipulated. In the hallway, just around the corner, Emily held her phone steady in trembling hands. The screen recorded silently, catching every word, every hiss of anger. You're not well, Daniel continued. You can't be. You're old, you're forgetful. Hell, last month you left the stove on for hours. Helen met his gaze. That was your wife. She was baking. That shut him up for a beat. I want the financial records, he snapped. Bank accounts, retirement. That's not a request. Helen's expression didn't change, but her voice did. Quiet, flinty. You're standing in my house, speaking like this, and you think you deserve access to my life? Daniel's face flushed, a mix of rage and panic. I've been patient, but if you want a war. A sharp click interrupted him. Emily stepped into the room, holding up her phone. I got every word. Daniel turned, color draining from his face. You were recording me? You threatened her, Emily said. You're lucky I didn't live stream it. For a moment it looked like he might lunge. Then he saw Helen, not cowering, not shaken, just standing beside the laundry basket like it was a shield. He stormed out without another word. That night, Rachel Kim met them at the house. She didn't sit. She moved with the urgency of someone who'd done this before, who knew exactly how a situation like this could spiral. I'm filing for a restraining petition first thing in the morning, she said, scribbling notes into a thin legal pad. Based on intimidation, harassment, attempted financial coercion. The recording will help. Emily, send me the file. Emily nodded. Already emailed. Rachel turned to Helen. I'm also attaching the medical report, your signed affidavit, and the witness statement. This is a solid case for a temporary order. If he tries to contest it, we'll go to court. Helen exhaled slowly. Will the judge take it seriously? Rachel straightened. You'll be in front of Judge Alan Whitman. No patience for manipulation. We'll file in the morning. Expect a hearing within 72 hours. Helen leaned back in the armchair, exhausted but resolute. I spent weeks trying to make sense of that note, she murmured. I knew it meant something. Now the court will know too. 2 days later, they sat in a quiet courtroom with high ceilings and wood-paneled walls. The clerk handed Judge Whitman the file. He read in. Silence for nearly 10 minutes while the room held its breath. Then, with a sharp rap of his gavel, he spoke. This court issues a temporary restraining order against Daniel Carter, effective immediately. He is to have no access to Helen Carter's financial record, property, or residence pending further review. Helen didn't smile. She just closed her eyes. The tide had shifted. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, thick and officious, with the county court seal pressed into the upper corner. Helen stared at it for a long time before breaking the seal with a letter opener, her hands steady but cold. Inside, a formal petition for guardianship, filed by Daniel Carter, claiming that Helen Carter, age 72, was mentally unstable, deteriorating in judgment, and at risk of self-harm or financial exploitation. Helen read the words twice, then set the papers down and folded her hands neatly in her lap. Her heart didn't pound, her stomach didn't drop. Instead, a kind of stillness settled over her, a deep, stony calm. She picked up the phone and called Rachel. 2 days later, the same wood-paneled courtroom welcomed her again, but this time Daniel sat at the opposite table. He looked freshly pressed, in a navy suit he couldn't quite afford, the knot of his tie slightly off-center. His lawyer, young, ambitious, overly confident, whispered something in his ear as Helen entered. Daniel didn't look at her. Not once. Rachel walked beside Helen with quiet confidence. Dr. Grant followed a few minutes later, nodding politely to the clerk as he took his seat in the front row. His presence wasn't required, yet, but Helen had asked him to come anyway, in case the court needed to see who still stood by her. Rachel leaned over and whispered, "He's going to push hard, but we've built a wall he can't climb." Helen nodded, her lips pressed into a line. Then let him wear himself out trying. Judge Alan Whitman entered promptly at 10. Stern as ever, he glanced between the two parties with that weary, no-nonsense gaze of a man who had long ago stopped tolerating drama dressed in legalese. Daniel's attorney went first. Your Honor, my client is seeking guardianship over his mother due to a clear and escalating pattern of cognitive decline. Miss Carter has exhibited confusion, impulsive decisions regarding her finances, and... Rachel stood. Your Honor, may I? Judge Whitman didn't look up. Proceed. Rachel stepped forward, document in hand. We submit Exhibit A, official neurocognitive testing results conducted last month by Dr. Michael Grant, a licensed physician who's treated Miss Carter for over a decade. The results show no signs of decline. In fact, they indicate a high level of cognitive function for her age. The young attorney blinked. We contend that the testing was incomplete. Rachel turned. Dr. Grant's full affidavit is included in the exhibit. The testing was comprehensive, and the doctor is present today should Your Honor have any questions. Judge Whitman flipped through the pages slowly. Dr. Grant, you stand by your assessment? Dr. Grant stood. Without hesitation, Your Honor. Mrs. Carter is as mentally sharp as she's ever been. Daniel shifted in his seat. His lawyer whispered again, more urgently this time. Judge Whitman looked up. Anything else? Daniel stood suddenly. She doesn't act sharp. She doesn't remember things. She locks herself in her room. She's paranoid. She thinks I'm out to get her. He paused, voice breaking slightly. I'm just trying to help. Rachel remained standing, her voice cool. By taking over her finances, filing for full guardianship without consent, making demands during verbal altercations, threatening your mother inside her home? Daniel flinched. His lawyer sat very still. In the back, Paula sat in the second row, half turned away from the courtroom. She hadn't spoken to Helen since the restraining order. Now, she kept her hands clasped in her lap, gaze fixed on the floor. She didn't speak. She didn't rise. She didn't defend him. Helen sat straight-backed, binder in, lap every document, medical, legal, financial, was labeled and tabbed, prepared meticulously with Emily's help. She didn't need to speak. The evidence spoke louder. So did her posture. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was presence. Judge Whitman looked at Daniel like a man studying a broken compass. I find no immediate evidence supporting the claim of mental incompetence, given the petitioner's prior history with this court. He glanced at the restraining order. We will move to a full evidentiary hearing within 2 weeks. Gavel. Bang. It was just past 7 a.m. when Helen's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it slowly, expecting a morning check-in from Emily, or maybe a reminder from the pharmacy. But as soon as she opened the message, something in her chest went tight. Back off or someone else gets hurt. No name, no punctuation, just that. She read it twice. The number was unfamiliar. Local area code. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her hand resting gently over her chest, like she could steady her heart by touch alone. Then, calm as ever, she reached for the reading glasses on her nightstand and walked downstairs. Rachel Kim sipped her coffee at Helen's kitchen table, flipping through the latest version of the trust document. The morning sunlight hadn't warmed the room yet, and the air still held the cold edge of early fall. Helen set her phone down beside Rachel's papers. The message glowed on the screen. Rachel read it once, then looked up, her face hardening. Did Daniel ever have access to your phone number? Helen nodded. He gave it to my pharmacist once. Rachel didn't ask anything else. She grabbed a pen and pad. We report it. Today, the officer who came to the house was quiet and methodical. Middle-aged, polite, but not overly warm. He treated Helen like someone he'd want for a grandmother. He took her statement, photographed the message, asked a few questions, and said he'd check with the department's cyber unit for the number trace. Helen offered him coffee. He declined with a smile, already turning back to his notepad. You'd be surprised how often this happens, he muttered. People don't get their way, so they escalate. Helen watched him with clear, calm eyes. That's what I'm counting on. By evening, the officer had called back. The number was traced to a prepaid phone, purchased with cash. But, luckily for Helen, not cleverly enough. The store's security camera showed a man purchasing the phone, mid-30s, brown hair, wearing a utility polo with a logo from the landscaping company Daniel worked for. Co-worker of your son's, the officer confirmed. We're not ready to call it a direct threat yet, but we've got enough to build a case file. Rachel's voice on the other line was colder. They're trying to scare you into backing down. Helen didn't flinch. They'll need a better plan. Later that night, Emily came over. She'd just finished a late shift at the campus library and still had her ID lanyard around her neck. When Helen told her about the message, Emily didn't take it well. He what? She snapped, pacing the living room. He's got someone threatening you now? Helen tried to ease the moment. Technically, we don't know that it was him. Emily spun. Please. We both know it was. She glanced down at the open notebook on the coffee table. Helen had been writing in it again. Notes, times, dates, thoughts. Everything since the day in the doctor's office. Is this your log? Emily asked. Helen nodded. Every message, every comment, every look Nancy came by shortly after, still wearing her gardening gloves and a canvas sun hat. When Emily told her about the threat, Nancy pulled the hat off with a dramatic huff. They're cornered. Men like Daniel don't handle that well. She noticed the open journal. Her eyes flicked over the pages. Helen's tiny, neat handwriting marching down the lines like soldiers. Your notebook is a sword, Nancy said. Every word is something they can't take back. Helen didn't answer right away. She closed the journal gently, as if tucking away a secret. Then, she whispered, then I'll use it. The bank lobby smelled of polished wood and stale carpet, the kind of place designed to make people feel both important and watched. Helen sat in a leather chair across from a man in a navy blue suit, whose badge read, Gregory Shaw, Senior Account Manager. He smiled politely, but she could see the stiffness in his jaw, the kind of tightness reserved for difficult conversation. I appreciate you coming in, Mrs. Carter, he said, flipping through a printout on his desk. You were right to call us. Helen didn't smile. She sat with her purse in her lap, notebook tucked inside, her hands folded over it like a ritual. You said there was an issue with a transfer request? She asked. Gregory nodded. Last Friday, someone attempted to initiate a wire transfer from your checking account to an external routing number. Roughly $9,800. Helen blinked slowly. I didn't request that. I figured as much. The form was submitted electronically, but the signature didn't match your record. Our fraud team flagged it immediately. Who has access to my banking information? She asked evenly. That's the thing. Whoever submitted it had your account number, your routing info, and even your birth date. He slid the document across the desk. But not your handwriting. Helen took the paper and studied the forged signature. It was close, but not hers. Not even close enough to pass if someone knew her, but it was close enough to try and get away with it. Do you need me to tell you who did this? She asked. Gregory exhaled carefully. Not officially. But if you'd like to file an internal fraud report, I'll walk it. Through myself, Rachel took one look at the paperwork and tapped her pen twice against her legal pad. Adds a pattern? She said. First the threat. Now financial manipulation. She motioned to Emily, who was sitting at the dining table, binder open, dividers labeled in bright yellow tabs. Medical, legal, digital, financial. Emily inserted the new documents into the financial tab, hole-punched and filed with care. This will all go before the judge at the final hearing, Rachel said. He's going to see the story we're building. Every page, every pattern, every tactic. Helen nodded. Let's make sure it reads clearly. The house was quiet when Helen got home that evening. She stepped inside, set her purse down, and walked to the kitchen. The air was still, almost too still, like the house had exhaled and decided not to inhale again. Daniel wasn't in the living room. His car was parked outside, but he stayed in his bedroom now, rarely came down, rarely spoke. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the table. A moment later, Paula appeared in the doorway, her steps tentative, like someone approaching a sleeping dog. I didn't know, Paula said, eyes low. About the bank? The phone? Any of it? Helen said nothing. She just sipped her water. Paula stepped closer, voice softer. I thought it was about helping. About protecting you. Helen looked up at her, finally meeting her eyes. It was never about protection. Not mine, anyway. Paula swallowed hard. He's unraveling. I think he's scared. Helen set her glass down. He should be. Paula nodded, silent. Before she turned to leave, she whispered, I'm sorry. I didn't know it'd go this far. Helen's response was quiet, calm, certain. It already has. Later that night, Rachel called. I've drafted everything. We're formally entering the bank fraud into the court record. With the texts and the recording, the judge will have no room for doubt. Helen stood by the front window, looking out over the darkened street. The streetlights glowed gold in the quiet. Good, she said. Let's finish it. The newspaper hit the porch with a soft thwack, its sound muffled by the early morning breeze and the faded welcome mat. Helen opened the door in her robe and slippers, her breath visible in the crisp Wisconsin air. The street was still. A few joggers in the distance, a school bus slowing to a crawl. She picked up the paper, slipped on her glasses, and unfolded the front page. Exposing the invisible. Elder fraud rises behind closed doors. Byline. Madison Tribune staff. Below it, a full-color photo of Helen, taken with her permission just days earlier, sitting in her armchair, hands folded over a leather-bound notebook. The story ran in a bold two-column spread. It didn't name Daniel directly, pending court proceedings, the paper had explained, but it didn't need to. The quotes said enough. You never think it's your own family until it is. Helen Carter, retired librarian, 72. She's fully capable, and she's fighting back. Most victims don't. Rachel Kim, elder law attorney. Helen stared at the ink until her hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from something else. A deep, bone-rooted ache of truth finally being heard. By noon, she couldn't even step outside to water her marigolds without someone slowing their car or waving from across the sidewalk. Mrs. Langford from 2 doors down brought over banana bread and whispered, We always wondered about your son. He never once waved when I passed. At the cafe 3 blocks away, 2 retired teachers folded their copies of the Tribune and lowered their voices as Helen entered to buy her tea. And at home, Daniel didn't come downstairs. Not once. Nancy arrived later with 2 grocery bags and a grin stretched wide enough to cut glass. You see today's front page? She said, practically throwing the paper on the kitchen table like a royal proclamation. That boy's got nowhere to hide now. Helen raised an eyebrow. They didn't even use his name. Doesn't matter. Nancy said, unpacking bread and eggs. This town runs on whisper and coffee. They know. And more importantly, he knows they know. She dropped into a chair and sighed dramatically. He can't spin headlines, honey. Not the printed kind. Helen allowed herself the smallest smile. That evening, Emily came by after class. She didn't knock, just let herself in the way she always had. She held a second copy of the Tribune, folded down the center, already creased from reading. She laid it on the kitchen table next to Helen's tea. "You look like a goddamn hero in this," she said softly, dropping into the chair beside her. Helen chuckled. "I look like someone who forgot her hair appointment." Emily reached for her hand. "You look like someone who stood up when most people would have gone quiet." They sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound between them. Then Emily added, "I'm proud of you." Helen didn't speak. She just squeezed her granddaughter's hand. Rachel called just before sunset. Her voice was steady, but sharper than usual, like the pieces were clicking faster now. "The Tribune piece helps more than you think," she said. "It may not be evidence, but it builds perception, and community pressure matters in family court." Judges read newspapers too. Helen stood by the window again, as she always did during these long, quiet moments. Across the street, the neighbors who once glanced past her now slowed to wave. She nodded at Rachel's words. "Good. Let them feel the weight of it." Rachel hesitated. "You breathing any easier?" Helen looked down at the story again. Her picture, her words, her truth, finally public. "A little," she said. "Enough to stand taller." But as the sky darkened over Madison, tension still lingered at the edge of everything. The final hearing loomed, 3 days away now, and no one believed Daniel would go quietly, especially not Helen. The courtroom was warmer than usual. Autumn sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching dust motes in the air like suspended time. Helen sat perfectly still in her usual place, binder in her lap, spine straight. Her lavender blouse matched the shade of her nail polish, subtle but intentional. Emily sat to her right, hands folded, jaw set. Nancy sat behind them, knitting needles in hand, clicking quietly like a metronome. Rachel Kim stood at the front table, the day's filings spread out in perfect order, her pen balanced precisely between them. Daniel was late. When he finally appeared, 10 minutes past the hour, he walked in fast, red-faced, his tie loose, papers barely contained in a folder he had no control over. His lawyer trailed behind, clearly having given up on appearances. Judge Whitman raised a single brow from the bench. "Nice of you to join us, Mr. Carter. Shall we begin?" Daniel mumbled something unintelligible and sat. The hearing opened with procedural motion, routine, dry, and clipped. But the tension in the room was tight, humming beneath every word. Finally, Judge Whitman folded his hands and looked at Rachel. "Let's talk about the property." Rachel stood, calm as water. "Your Honor, per the trust filed 2 weeks ago, the deed to Ms. Carter's home is no longer in her personal name. It is now part of an irrevocable trust, legally shielded from any financial claims or guardianship motions unless overturned by court order." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" His lawyer leaned over to whisper frantically, but Rachel continued, voice smooth and impenetrable. "This trust was established when Ms. Carter was certified competent, confirmed by medical evaluation and notarized witness. It includes all her major assets, home, savings, and retirement account, with successor trustee rights already designated." She turned and nodded to Helen. "In short, this house is no longer a target." Helen didn't flinch. She looked straight ahead, calm, eyes unreadable. Daniel rose, nearly knocking over his chair. "This is fraud. She's been manipulated. She's been turned against her own family." Judge Whitman's voice cut like a cleaver. "Sit down, Mr. Carter." Daniel froze mid-motion. Whitman continued, "You've brought this court half-baked motions, unsubstantiated accusations, and now you're surprised that your mother has protected herself with full legal standing? If I were in her position, I'd have done the same. Faster." A slow ripple moved through the courtroom. Even the clerk lowered his head to hide a smirk. Rachel didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The facts stood taller than any victory lap. Daniel sank into his chair, face burning, knuckles white on the edge of the table. Behind Helen, Nancy leaned forward and whispered, "He keeps hitting brick walls you built." Helen didn't look back. "Good," she murmured. "Let him bruise." Emily reached for her grandmother's hand and squeezed it gently. Helen didn't smile, but she let her granddaughter hold on. Judge Whitman glanced at the clock. Unless there's new, credible evidence, this court sees no reason to continue entertaining further motions from the petitioner regarding the Carter residence. Motion dismissed. Gavel. Bang. Daniel shoved his chair back with a screech of wood on tile and stormed out, his folders spilling papers onto the aisle. He didn't stop to pick them up. Paula, seated in the gallery, covered her face with one hand. Helen stood slowly, her body stiff but steady. She didn't look at the door Daniel had slammed shut behind him. She didn't need to. She had the house. She had the truth. And now, she had the court's full attention. Rachel's office smelled faintly of toner and espresso, the kind of scent that settled into the fibers of the carpet like strategy. Stacks of color-coded folders lined the conference table, each tab a piece of the story Helen had spent months fighting to tell. At the head of the table, Rachel clicked her pen and pulled up the checklist. Her tone was clipped, surgical, medical, Dr. Grant's report, neurological assessment, cognitive baseline, done, bank, fraud documentation, Shaw's affidavit, flag transfer record, done, digital, text threats, burner number trace, surveillance footage from the prepaid phone kiosk, also done. Emily sat to Helen's left, flipping through the trial binder with fast, practiced fingers. She'd highlighted and labeled every section in fluorescent color, each page a small act of loyalty. Rachel turned to her. "You still good to testify?" Emily nodded, her voice steady. "I remember everything, especially the day he screamed at her about the trust. I'll say it under oath." Rachel smiled faintly. "That's all I need." In the days that followed, preparations turned from defensive to offensive. Dr. Grant came by Helen's house on Wednesday evening after office hours, his stethoscope still tucked into the pocket of his light jacket. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. "I'm not worried," he said, adjusting his glasses. "I'll tell them what I've told you from the start. You're lucid, articulate, and sharper than some of my 40-year-old patients." Helen gave a dry smile. "Then let's hope the judge believes in science." He tilted his head. "Judges believe in credibility. And you have that in spades?" In the living room, Helen sat with her notebook and practiced her statement aloud. Not a full testimony, just a brief opening if called. She kept it short. She kept it simple. And she kept it honest. "My name is Helen Carter. I am 72 years old. I am in full control of my faculties and my future. This case is not about illness. It is about control. And my refusal to give it up." She didn't rehearse emotion. She didn't need to. Daniel's legal team filed a last-minute motion the day before the hearing, something weak, theatrical. A motion to dismiss all previous evidence citing coercion by external influence. Rachel rolled her eyes as she read it aloud at the breakfast. "They're trying to paint Emily and me as puppet masters," she muttered, "that you're being manipulated by younger women who overstepped their legal boundary." Nancy, perched on a kitchen stool, barked a laugh. "Well, if this whole thing is witchcraft, they better start swimming. Because I'm not finished stirring the pot." At the pre-hearing review, Judge Whitman listened to Daniel's lawyer deliver his latest string of allegations: undue influence, emotional instability, and Helen's alleged obsession with controlling her narrative through the media. Rachel stood and countered with a wordless exhibit, an overhead slide showing every threat, every form, every signature, every timestamp. Whitman didn't speak for a full minute. Then he simply looked at Daniel's counsel and said, "You've brought me fog. She's brought me receipts." Daniel's lawyer wilted. That night, Helen walked the length of her home slowly, past the photo of her and Emily at Emily's high school graduation, past the old bookshelf where her library card still lived, past the door to the guest room where Nancy sometimes stayed. Everything felt quiet, but not like it used to, not like retreat, more like readiness. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the envelope again, the first one, the one from Dr. Grant. She'd kept it this whole time. The ink had faded, but the truth had only sharpened. Helen spotted it the moment she opened the front door. A plain white envelope resting crookedly between the welcome mat and the doorframe, half crushed where someone had clearly slid it under. No postage, no address, no name, just like last time. She picked it up carefully and turned it over. It was unsealed, light, thin. She opened it slowly, the paper inside rustling like dry leaves. Cut-out magazine letters were glued onto a sheet of printer paper in jagged rows. Drop it. No signature. Just that. 3 blocky, uneven letters in red. 2 in black. 1 in bold gold foil. The kind used in department store ads. The glue was still faintly tacky. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later, her heels echoing through the hallway before she even spoke. She didn't ask permission, just stepped inside, took one look at the note laid out on the kitchen counter and exhaled like she'd seen it coming. Jesus, she muttered. He's not even trying to be subtle anymore. Helen poured her a cup of coffee. Calm, focus. He thinks I'll scare easy, she said, sliding the mug across the counter. But fear is a confession. And I'm not the one confessing. Rachel nodded, already pulling a latex glove from her purse and slipping it on. She carefully placed the envelope and its contents into a plastic sleeve, then into a slim evidence folder. I'll have Officer Donnelly swing by. It'll get logged, photographed, and matched to the first message. If he or anyone connected to him touched it, we'll know. From the other room, the front door slammed open. Emily. She stormed into the kitchen, breathless, having just seen the news from a text Rachel had sent. Tell me this is a joke, she said, eyes blazing as she saw the envelope. Helen met her gaze. It's not. Emily stared at the note. He's threatening you again? Rachel looked up. We can't prove it's him. Not yet. But the style is consistent. So is the message. Emily's hands curled into fists. He's unraveling. Helen simply lifted the corner of the paper and studied it again. He's scared. That's why it's messy this time. Rachel slid the folder into her briefcase. Scared men with nothing left to lose get dangerous. From behind them, Nancy's voice floated in as she entered through the back door, holding a bag of lemons from her garden like it was a basket of grenades. He's spiraling, she said, setting the bag down. And when a man like Daniel spirals, he grabs for anything to steady himself. Even if it means dragging everyone else into the fall. Emily looked like she might explode. Let me testify early, she said suddenly, turning to Rachel. Let me go first. Make it clear from the start who he is, what he's doing. Rachel shook her head gently. You'll speak, but not from anger, from power. We go in calm, controlled. We let him look volatile. Helen sipped her coffee, then leaned against the counter. I've spent my whole life learning to speak softly, she said. Tomorrow, I won't raise my voice, but I will be heard. Just before sunset, Officer Donnelly arrived to collect the envelope. He was careful, professional, logged it on the porch, sealed it inside an evidence pouch, and asked a few quiet questions. As he turned to go, he paused at the edge of the driveway. Most folks who get messages like this, they back down. You didn't. Helen met his eyes. Maybe that's why I got a second one. Later that night, Rachel called from her office. It's in the file. I've submitted both threats. The judge will see them first thing in the morning. He's going to walk into that courtroom knowing what kind of man we're dealing with. Helen stood by her window again, watching the street. No cars, no footsteps, no envelope, just silence. The courthouse was quiet at 8:03 a.m., but inside courtroom 4B, tension was already settling like fog. Helen sat at the petitioner's table in her charcoal gray suit, hands folded over her binder. Her lipstick was a soft mauve, her posture immaculate, her voice silent but ready. Emily sat beside her, one hand gently gripping the handle of the rolling evidence. Nancy sat 2 rows back, knitting in her lap but eyes sharp. Rachel Kim stood at the table, files stacked with surgical precision. Daniel was already seated across the aisle, alone. No Paula, no lawyer, just him. The court-appointed counsel he'd demanded at the 11th hour was still reviewing the folder Rachel had legally submitted weeks ago. His expression was grim. Judge Whitman entered at 8:11. All rise. They did. He glanced down at his docket, then at Helen. Miss Carter, are you ready to proceed? Rachel stood, voice level. We are, Your Honor. Then let's begin. Rachel began with a 3-minute statement that was less performance and more scalpel. Sharp, clean, and irreversible. She laid out the medical records, the financial logs, the threatening messages, the forged signature, the text traced to Daniel's coworker. She spoke slowly, knowing each point landed heavier because of the silence between them. Then she rested her palm on the exhibit binder. We have submitted 72 pages of documentation, including notarized affidavits, time-stamped screenshots, and 2 audio recordings. Let's hear the audio, Judge Whitman said, already reaching for the court headphones. Emily pulled out her phone, passed it to the clerk. In the silent courtroom, Daniel's voice crackled through the speakers. I want the financial record. That's not a request. You're being manipulated. If you want a war, click. Rachel looked up. My client didn't raise her voice. She didn't retaliate. She documented. She protected herself. That is not the behavior of someone in decline. Dr. Grant was called next. He wore no white coat today, just a navy blazer. Clean line, quiet authority. I evaluated Mrs. Carter 3 times over the past 9 months, he testified. Every result shows high executive function, language retention, memory recall. She's as mentally sharp as she's ever been. Any medical reason she'd need a guardian? Whitman asked. Dr. Grant didn't blink. None. Rachel nodded. No further questions. Daniel's court-appointed counsel offered none either. The truth had become radioactive, too dangerous to touch. Rachel closed with a single sheet. The latest threat. Magazine letters. Drop it. The second one, she said quietly. Delivered just yesterday. Same tactic. Same threat. Same silence from the other party. Whitman glanced at the exhibit. Was this reported? Yes, Rachel said. Officer Donnelly's report is in the file. The judge sat back, temple resting on his fingers as he reviewed the folder once more. Then, slowly, he folded it shut. This case has never been about guardianship, he said. It has been about control, about entitlement, intimidation, and fear. And Miss Carter has responded to all 3 with more grace and clarity than most people half her age. Daniel shifted in his seat, red-faced, silent. Judge Whitman looked straight at him. Mr. Carter, this court hereby denies your guardianship petition in full. Daniel jolted forward as if to object, but the judge held up one hand. Further, you are barred from accessing any of Miss Carter's financial accounts or property. You will pay restitution for legal costs incurred by this process. The court finds your actions to be deliberately manipulative and in violation of both ethical and familial trust. Bang. Gavel. The courtroom froze. Rachel inhaled slowly. Emily covered her mouth. Nancy clapped once sharply, before remembering where she was. Helen didn't move. Not right away. Then she reached down, opened her notebook, and crossed out a single line. If he tries again. Outside, sunlight poured down the courthouse steps like some divine mercy. Helen moved slowly, hand on Emily's arm, binder clutched to her chest like armor that had finally done its job. You okay? Emily asked. Helen nodded, then paused. I think, she said softly. I finally am. The house exhaled. That was the only way Helen could describe it. A long, quiet release, like the creaking sigh of a ship that had finally made it through a storm. The binder sat open on the dining room table, its rings wide, waiting. Helen moved slowly, methodically, slipping each page into its place like a final piece of armor. Medical evaluations, bank affidavits, court transcripts, restraining order, trust certification, final judgment. 72 documents, clean, legal, and hers. She closed the binder with a soft click. The sound echoed in the stillness like punctuation. Emily walked in from the hallway, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She set one beside the binder, then leaned down and wrapped her arms around Helen's shoulders. It wasn't the tight squeeze of fear or urgency. It was quieter, heavier, a goodbye to battle. Helen reached up and placed a hand on her granddaughter's arm. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. From the kitchen came a pop, then a fizz, then Nancy's voice. Jesus, that cork nearly took out the ceiling. Helen turned just as Nancy walked in, bottle of chilled champagne in one hand, 3 glasses stacked in the other. I figured, she said, if we're gonna celebrate, we're not doing it with herbal tea and polite applause. She poured each glass with care, the bubbles rising like promises. Then she raised hers. To the quiet, she said. Emily smiled and raised hers. To the strong. Helen lifted her glass last. To the women who never asked permission. They clinked, gently. Later, Rachel arrived, briefcase in hand, her hair swept back, face relaxed for the first time in weeks. I brought your copies, she said, setting down the final trust paperwork. Stamped, recorded. Official. Helen flipped through the packet, fingers brushing embossed seals, notarized signatures. It's done then? She asked quietly. Rachel nodded. Every thread tied, every door locked. He can't touch anything now. Helen exhaled, then whispered almost to herself, safe at last. Rachel looked at her, almost like she might cry. You made it so. No, Helen said. We did. Outside, the sun began its slow descent behind the maple trees, casting golden light across the wood grain of the dining table. The air through the open window smelled faintly of leaves and cooling earth. For the first time in months, no papers waited to be signed. No court dates loomed. No knock at the door made her flinch. Just light, and warmth, and stillness. Helen sipped her champagne slowly, savoring the silence. She looked at the binder beside her and gently pushed it toward the center of the table. No longer something to guard, but something to rest. I don't know what to do tomorrow, she said softly. Nancy smiled. Sleep past 6, eat pie for breakfast, and if you're bored, I've got a garden bed that needs weeding. Emily laughed. Or you could start writing your book. You've got the whole thing right there. She tapped the binder. Helen stared at it for a moment, then nodded, just once. The house settled into evening. Rachel stayed for tea. Nancy put on soft jazz. Emily lit the good candle from the drawer Helen always told her not to touch. They didn't talk about Daniel, not once, because there was nothing left to say. The ballroom smelled like fresh linen and stage lights. Rows of white folding chairs fanned out from a low riser, the kind of stage used for keynote speakers and donor galas, not war stories. But this wasn't an ordinary conference. A gold banner stretched above the podium, Wisconsin Coalition for Elder Advocacy, Annual Summit. Helen stood behind the curtain waiting for her cue. Her name had just been read, twice, once formally and again with applause. Not hesitant applause, real, rooted. She wore her gray suit again, the one from court. But this time, no binder, just a single folded sheet in her hand. Rachel waited beside her backstage, arms crossed, chin high. You don't need notes, she whispered. Helen smiled. That's why I brought one. Emily stood near the front row, holding her phone horizontally, recording. Her face was beaming, not from pride alone, but recognition. The kind that says, I see all you are, and I always have. Nancy sat next to her, in a blouse too floral for the occasion, grinning wide. She's about to light up this room, she muttered, nudging the woman beside her. Watch. The host stepped aside, gestured toward the mic, and Helen walked out slowly to center stage. No stumble, no hesitation, just the rhythm of someone who had practiced this walk, day by day in her own hallway. The applause ebbed, replaced by quiet. She adjusted the microphone. Then she began. Good morning. My name is Helen Carter. I am 72 years old. I'm a retired librarian, a grandmother, and until recently, I was nearly erased. No one stirred. My story started with a doctor's appointment, a quiet one, routine. I left that office with a sealed envelope and a whispered warning. She looked down for a beat, then up. I was healthy, sharp, entirely capable. But someone close to me didn't want that to be true. Someone who believed that age equals weakness, that gray hair means you stop being the author of your own life. Her voice didn't shake. He tried to take everything. My bank account, my home, my name. And for a while, I said nothing. Because saying nothing is what women like me were taught to do. A murmur of agreement, heads nodding. But silence protects the wrong people. She unfolded the paper in her hand. It was the first note. Dr. Grant's test results. The original. I kept this, she said. The whole time. Through hearings, threats, forged documents, anonymous messages. I never let it go. She paused, then smiled. Because when you know who you are, really know, no one else gets to decide for you. The applause started gently, but it swelled. Helen wasn't finished. Advocacy isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a notebook, a phone call, a single, quiet no. And sometimes it's standing in front of strangers with nothing left to prove. She folded the paper again. I never lost my results, she said. Not medically, not legally, not personally. Then she stepped back from the microphone, shoulders square, gaze steady. The room erupted, standing ovation, dozens of people on their feet, some older, some younger, some in suits, some in cardigans, but all clapping, loud, proud, undeniable. Helen didn't bow. She just stood still, letting the applause wash over her like sunlight through windows she'd once kept locked. Backstage, Emily wiped her eyes and hugged her grandmother tight. You didn't just tell your story, she whispered. You rewrote the whole damn book. Nancy laughed as she popped a mint. From whispered insults to microphone. Who knew? Helen pulled in a breath and exhaled slowly. I did. They stepped into the hallway, where the late afternoon sun lit the carpet like stained glass. Helen looked at the envelope again in her hands, the one she'd carried on stage, the one that had once felt so heavy. Then she whispered, almost to herself, and when I opened the envelope, it held more than results. It held my freedom.